Good afternoon, everyone. This is John Rust on the Radio on Freedom 95, the right station for talk, 950 AM and 95.9 FM, broadcasting all across what I like to say and borrow from Rush Limbaugh, the beautiful fruited plain of our great state of Indiana. So in major news this week, Beau Bayh, a.k.a. Birch Bayh the 7th, or is it the 4th? I forget which, announced he is running for Indiana Secretary of State. Some of his main talking points are points I've been talking about on the show for the past year. Number one, that Indiana ranks dead last in voter participation in the United States. Well, why is that? We ban 81% of Hoosiers from even running for political office. But folks, Beau Bayh moved to Indiana from somewhere out east. He's like Jim Banks, an East Coast liberal that claims Indiana only when running for office. Two peas in a pod, both privileged party elites being forced on Hoosiers. And Jim Banks actually lives in Virginia. He's not lived in Indiana for years and years and years. And Jim Banks this week had the gall to call out Beau Bayh for moving to Indianapolis. Well, at least Beau Bayh actually lives here now. That's way more than you're doing, Jim. The corrupt career politicians that control the GOP and Democratic Party here in Indiana have no problem with outsiders when they're part of their club. But me, when I ran, I have lived in Indiana my entire life. I was born here. I have always lived here. The GOP actually challenged me on my residency, and I've lived in the same house for the past 40 years now. It's just insanity. But the Democrats are greasing the slate for Beau Bayh just like the establishment did for Jim Banks. The party elites control who is elected in Indiana, not Hoosier voters. Remember, had Abraham Lincoln ran for office in Indiana, had he remained a Hoosier, he could not have met the two primary rules, so he wouldn't have been able to run had he remained a Hoosier. That is what you and I are up against, folks. Beau Bayh is likely going to easily beat Diego Morales, in my opinion, because I do not want to see the Indiana Secretary of State fall into the hands of the Democrats. And remember, folks, the Democratic Party is the party of child mutilation, the party of abortion on demand up to and including after birth, the party of massive taxation and spending. Well, in fairness, in Indiana, the Republicans are no different on that. I call on Diego Morales to immediately resign as Secretary of State. I call on Governor Braun to immediately appoint myself, John Rust, to be Indiana's Secretary of State. The corruption at the Indiana Secretary of State office must end immediately. This would send a clear message that the Indiana Republican Party does not stand for corruption and scandal that has plagued the Diego Morales administration. I am the only Republican in the state of Indiana that can beat Birch Bayh the 7th. The Republican Party must hold the office of Secretary of State. The Democrat machine is behind Birch Evan Bayh. We cannot have the Democratic Party gain any statewide offices, folks. Indiana is a ruby red state. Indiana needs leaders who are conservative, not establishment. Indiana needs non-politicians to fix our state and lead us forward to fight the data centers, the massive electric rate increases, the massive gasoline tax increases, the tolling of all Indiana interstates, and not just sit around and tweet and buy expensive luxury SUVs to be chauffeured around in. It is time the Indiana Republican Party once again be conservative. So in the interest of our state, I call on Diego Morales to immediately resign and for Governor Braun to appoint myself, John Rust, to this important job to once again make Indiana a true red state. It is clear that Diego Morales and the Indiana GOP establishment have harmed our state, and it is time for real conservative leadership. Indiana should not have property taxes going through the roof. Indiana should not have the second highest sales tax in the country. Indiana should not be adding tolls to every mile of Indiana interstates. Indiana should not have electric prices going up 9% last year and 17% this year. So, folks, I am not running. I'm not a candidate for any office. But if Governor Braun asked me to help save the Indiana Republican Party, how could I possibly say no? Hoosiers have had it with the establishment in both parties, the insane left-wing craziness of the left and the high taxes of the Indiana big government party, today's establishment GOP. Because I stand for actual Hoosiers, I am a farmer, not a politician. And remember, I had more ballot signatures all across the entire state than any other candidate for the U.S. Senate when I ran for office. Thousands and thousands more. It is time we Hoosiers run our state. So, folks, for today's show, we're going to be talking about property tax, and that's one of the reasons I think Bayh has a huge chance to win in our state is because career politicians has completely trashed our state by the despicable way we tax Hoosiers on their property. And I have a very special guest today. So, folks, we're in for a treat today. We have JENEE Trimble. Welcome to the show, JENEE.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name's JENEE Trimble, and I'm from Monroe County, born and raised there.
What a beautiful county.
It is a beautiful county. It's a shame what is being done to it. We've been Democratic-led for 35, 40 years now.
Well, I'm very familiar with Bloomington. I went to IU, and I lived most of the time in Seymour, and I commuted, so I would drive across Lake Monroe to go to Bloomington every day while I was still working on my family's farms.
Yeah.
I worked my way through school, but my gosh, what a beautiful drive. We are so blessed in this state. So go on, I'm sorry.
No, you are perfectly fine. So I have a background in real estate of close to 20 years, and I was employed by the Monroe County Assessor from October 2023 until October 2024.
Okay.
And then I transitioned to the auditor's office.
So I have been reading your Facebook posts. You are a beacon of hope for Indiana, raising, what I believe I'm doing. You are raising the curtain and shining the light on what's wrong in our state. And so I applaud you for that.
Thank you. I'm trying to do that, trying to bring just education, honesty, and transparency to the residents of Monroe County and all of Indiana. And that has not been very well received.
So can you tell me the history of property tax in Indiana and how both parties are seeking to take homes away from Hoosiers?
Yeah, so I know Indiana, just from the inception of it becoming a state, they immediately initiated property taxes.
And how was it assessed early on?
Well, so early on, it started out, it was just a fixed rate for everyone. And it just
Was it based on?
Per acre.
Per acre. And was it a fixed rate irregardless of what the assessed value was?
I think so. And at this time, I think they only taxed on land. This is before any kind of
So there was no tax on houses then?
Right.
That's very interesting.
And
that's one of the things Ron DeSantis is looking to do in Florida is do away with the property tax on people's homes because you should not be paying rent to the government for property you paid for.
Right. I agree. I hope Indiana follows suit with Florida.
And that's our history.
Yes.
So why can't we go back to that? And so I'll tell you folks why. Career politicians love tax revenue. And the key word there is career politicians. And it's in both parties. It's equal.
Oh, yeah. Property taxes, it's the main revenue for local and state government.
Well, we had the Democratic Party in control of the state for, when I was young, all the time. Mm-hmm. And they ran them through the roof. The Republicans reformed property taxes in the early 2000s. But unfortunately, there's a what do you call it, a snag in the system, a snafu in the system that is being exploited to rake over the coals Hoosier homeowners. And specifically, that is how homes are assessed by 100% market value rather than purchase price.
That was changed in 2002. So prior to 2002, true tax value was defined as being 1/3 of acquisition cost. So just your cost when you purchased the home. I think it was in 1996 when they filed the suit, but in 1999, the Indiana Supreme Court ruled on a case. It was the Indiana State Board of Tax Commissioners versus the town of St. John. The town of St. John was trying to appeal the assessments to be less.
Okay.
Yeah, they were appealing.
But the party insiders were saying no.
Yeah. The State Board of Tax Commissioners were the ones saying no. So the Indiana Supreme Court ruled that the assessment system was unconstitutional. those facts.
So at that time, what was found unconstitutional was that the assessed value was based on a market rate over a period of time, plus what the rate was when you purchased it. And it was kind of a formula that was complicated, and I think that really just kind of bamboozled people.
Yeah.
And so people really couldn't figure out their property taxes. But now it's worse because they have went to 100% market today.
Yes. And within that system, too, there are a lot of legal ways to manipulate those numbers outside of the illegal ways that are being practiced by the assessors. So when they ruled that, the Indiana General Assembly, they tasked the Indiana State Board of Tax Commissioners to come up with this new assessment system. So there were two men, the co-creators, Frank Kelly and it's Jeff Wunsch. They went to IU together, and so they worked for the tax commissioners. One was the director, one was the assistant director of the tax review division. So they're the co-creators of this current assessment system.
And who appointed them?
The Indiana General Assembly. And this was in 1998. Yeah, so if you go back and you read all of their old articles during this time period, every article was speaking about how the homeowners were not being taxed enough, that commercial properties were bearing the brunt.
Folks, did you hear that?
Yes.
You weren't being taxed enough.
Yes.
Folks, we're out of time on this segment, but when we come back, we're going to talk about how the establishment back then said you weren't being taxed enough. Isn't that a surprise? This is John Rust on the Radio. We shall return. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on the Radio, here in the studio today with JENEE Trimble. Welcome back.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So we were talking about a hot topic, property taxes, and how they are unfairly assessed. And one thing I have a problem with is I do not believe we should be taxing people for unrealized gains. And that's exactly what's happening in property taxes today across the state of Indiana. So even if your property was being assessed fairly, and unfortunately, JENEE's going to go into how that's actually not the case. Even if it was assessed fairly, you're still being taxed on something that you didn't do. It's an unrealized gain. We should not be doing it. So JENEE, I'm sorry. So on actual assessment of houses, JENEE, in my opinion, the greatest theft is how the process was changed to be market value rather than when it was a fixed value. Can you explain that further?
Yes. So when the Indiana State Board of Tax Commissioners was tasked back in 1998 to come up with a new assessment system, the two co-creators, they're IU alumni and they were co-workers. So they created this new tax assessing system, but in all of their articles around this time period, they were speaking of how commercial was bearing the brunt of the property taxes and that they didn't think homeowners were being taxed as much as they should be and as much as they could be.
Because they were looking for ways to grow the government beast.
Yes, and multiple mentions of how they could get more. If they could convert to a market state value, that they could, increase the assessed values, therefore increasing the property tax amounts that are collected. They presented the new assessment system, and they were allowed. Prior to this, true tax value was defined in Indiana code as being 1/3 of the acquisition cost. They were able to change that legislation to where true tax value now means 100% market value in use. And that's what their assessment system is based upon.
And the housing bubble has just raised everyone's property taxes exponentially. So that when we had the quote-unquote property tax reform just passed by the Indiana State Assembly, it was meager, worthless. It was worthless in compared to what actually was happening in regards to your rates.
Correct.
It was a nothing burger. It was $300, but as I understand it, on average, most people's taxes went up $800 last year. Mine went up much more, and I think a lot of people's houses went up much, much, much higher.
Yeah, and Hoosiers, they do not need another useless tax reform bill. The root problem with property taxes is the assessment process.
Well, and I had a problem with where they said, that's a massive tax cut. It was a decrease in the rate of increase. When politicians start talking about the decrease in the rate of increase, that is just double speak. There is nothing worse, in my opinion, than politicians will sit there and tell you to your face that they're cutting your property taxes, even though they're actually going up. Pure and
Correct.
simple.
Correct.
So, in my own farmer opinion, if you buy a home, it should be yours for life. If suddenly all houses become expensive, like they are now, over a home shortage that you had nothing to do with, regular hardworking Hoosiers should not be penalized with higher taxes as a result.
I agree.
We shouldn't be forcing people that have worked all their lives and have retired or are still working to be forced out of their dream home that they've worked so hard for. That's the American dream, is home ownership. And in Indiana, we're working to take that away. That's wrong.
I agree.
I agree with Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, who says that property taxes for homes should be eliminated entirely. The path to that is very clear with what he's doing. He's going to be doing a referendum in the state of Florida to actually pass property tax reform. In Indiana, we cannot do referendums. You're looking at home. If you're sitting around the kitchen table and you're saying, well, gosh, what am I going to have to give up this year to pay this property tax? It could mean a vacation. It could mean, a down payment on a new car. In some cases, people are having to sell their homes because they could not meet the new property taxes. So, JENEE, would you like to talk about how people's homes are actually being taken away from them now?
Oh, yes. So when I was in the assessor's office, I was promoted to the assistant property director, and my line was the main line for the appeal season, which our appeal season was from May 1st until June 15th, and it's 45 days long.
Mm-hmm.
The majority of my calls were Habitat for Humanity houses, USDA rural housing loans, and those on Social Security. And many
on a fixed income.
And many of these homeowners were saying they're in financial duress because for the past several years, the property taxes have increased so much that they were going to have to sell their homes.
And it is especially biting for senior citizens. If you,
Yeah.
Because a lot of people live on Social Security, and they just do not have the extra dollars for these massive tax increases. And what burns me, folks, is what these counties are doing with that money. If you drive around Bloomington, you see these massive new buildings for all the government centers.
Waste.
And it's in Jackson County, too. We have this massive new, quote-unquote, courthouse annex to replace the courthouse, which is now left, I guess, as a museum. But boy, it was sure expensive. Seymour, I can't believe this little town of Seymour, Indiana, you won't believe this, they spent $1 million for a welcome to Seymour sign that most people drive by and never see it because it's so complicated. You don't even notice it. And they spent $1 million for it. Justin, did you notice it on your way in?
I barely
You
know.
did see it. Okay.
I know it's there, so I kind of look for it.
You're looking for the $1 million sign.
Exactly, but if I didn't know that was there, you're right, I probably wouldn't have seen it.
Well, it's a hodgepodge design.
We just did that too. Monroe County just did that too, and I believe ours was $2 million, around the $2 million mark. I'm not 100%
Folks,
sure.
why on earth?
Yeah.
We are a ruby red state. Ruby red. We're a conservative state. Why are we spending so much for these signs? There was on 60 Minutes back in the 1980s, I remember this, they did a segment, the smaller the town, the larger the sign. Well, in Indiana, the higher the property taxes, the much higher cost will be for the welcome sign at $1 million. That had to be an outlier. Folks, that is what is happening all across the state of Indiana. If you hear the state legislatures and these county governments saying, oh, we're short of funds, if they have money for this nonsense, they are swimming in it. They are swimming in tax revenue, just like the Indiana General Assembly is swimming in gasoline tax revenue. It is up record amounts. It goes higher every year. But they're saying, oh, it's not enough. We have to now toll you for every mile of Indiana interstates. No, that should not be. We should actually be looking to cut the Indiana gas tax, not looking for ways to increase tax revenue. We have to actually get smart about what's going on all these contracts for what's actually going on in road construction. If you see what's happened on the IEDC, how hundreds of millions of dollars is going out to preferred companies who are buddies, or in some instances for people that are actually working both for the IEDC and these companies, they are getting hundreds of millions of dollars of state funds. You, the taxpayer, are paying for that through property taxes, through our income taxes, through our local income taxes, through the wheel tax, through the gasoline tax, through the second highest in the nation sales tax. You know, I used to, back in the 1980s, we used to call Massachusetts Taxachusetts. Now Indiana has become the new Taxachusetts. That's wrong. Again, folks, we are a ruby red state. But back on property taxes. So the assessment process, one thing that concerns me, and maybe you can walk us through this, one person is deciding that a very nice office in one of these new buildings, I guess, how much your property tax is going to go up. So is there a computer formula they use, or is there a software program they use?
Yeah, so they have a software system that has the state mandated cost tables, grading tables, the real assessment property guidelines for Indiana. All the procedures are built into like this software. So the reassessment cycle is 4 years. Every parcel is supposed to be visited once within that 4 years during the reassessment cycle. So they break it down to 25% of the county per year. The field reps, which Indiana has mass appraisal companies that these counties contract with, that they provide the field reps. They're the ones that go out and physically visit these parcels. Outside of that 4 years, your property should not be looked at like with its physical characteristics changed unless you filed a permit for like new construction, a remodel, something like that that would trigger the assessor to go and take another look at that.
But these companies that are actually doing the physical assessment, you say they're an outside company, so that's not someone elected at the county level. That is a outside contractor that they are hiring?
Yes, and the company that they hire, the owners of that company were the co-creators of Indiana's assessment system.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
And they also, as part of their legislation, they retired the Indiana State Board of Tax Commissioners, and then they created out of that the Department of Local Government Finance and the Indiana Board of Tax Review.
So folks, there you have it. You see what's happening. It is just rewarding all your buddies in Indiana state government. That's what we're facing today. Folks, we're out of time for this segment. We will be right back. And this is John Rust on the Radio on Freedom 95. Stay tuned. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on the Radio on Freedom 95, 950 AM and 95.9 FM on your radio dial. So I'm in the studio today with JENEE Trimble and Justin. Welcome back. So we're talking about property taxes, and before the break, Justin was wanting to get my attention on something about how property taxes are being unfairly assessed in his county. Would you like to go into that, Justin?
Absolutely. So I kind of knew about this whole situation with property taxes a few years ago when with my Loki County's assessor election. What happened was a friend of mine's father was looking into how high our property taxes were going, and he wanted to know what was up. And he ended up finding out that my county's assessor, she didn't really know what she was doing, and she was just getting all of her information and her directions from the state, and everything the state told her to do, she did exactly that. And that's why our property taxes were getting jacked up. So he was like, well, this is obviously not right. This shouldn't be happening.
Does the local assessor have leeway in whatever they want to assess the property at? Will it be what they really want?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so that's fair, folks.
They make the assessed values exactly what they want them to be.
And so even though there may be a formula, it's really at the will of the assessor.
Yeah, correct.
And whether you're friends with them perhaps or not.
Oh, absolutely.
Or what your political donations are or not.
Absolutely. Within the assessment system.
Who you go to church with or.
Oh, yeah. They target people for sure. Within the assessment system, there are set cost tables and grading tables, set values. But within that system, there's built-in legally, they can manipulate those numbers with things called trending factors, market factors, neighborhood factors. They can throw in little percentages.
So really they can make it whatever they want.
But outside of what
Wow.
is how they can legally manipulate it, these assessors are also violating state code.
Well, and that's why I think we
procedure.
have to go back to, the purchase price.
Yes.
evaluation or the construction price. I just don't think you can tax people for unrealized gains.
You cannot.
Because most people are never going to sell their house. I've lived in my house for 40 years. I have zero desire to ever sell that house in my lifetime, ever.
With some of these practices, as far as three main ones, manipulation of their ratio studies, sales chasing, and adding trending factors when the properties are already at market value. Those three practices, you really manipulate your housing market. Like you cause it to increase way higher and way faster than what it would organically.
So what's going to happen? We're in a housing bubble right now, so housing prices have went up and up. To me, it looks like the housing bubble is about to burst at some point. So what will happen to all the assessed rates then? Will these local county governments just try to increase the rates because the assessed values will go down if it's based on market value, if the market is saying, hey, that's where the home price should be?
Oh, not our assessor. They held their ground.
And so they will just keep jacking up your price and the assessed value, even if the market crashes. Wow. And I think that's on the horizon.
Mm-hmm. They brag about that from going back to the little crash we had in 2008.
Well, you've worked in real estate. I mean, nothing goes up forever. It's just like
Right.
the stock market. There will be, ebbs and tides. It's always going to be going up at some time, and it'll be going down at some time. But, folks, the tax assessors, they ain't going to let it go down. They are too addicted to that money, to these local county governments. It's like fentanyl. Your property tax, that is a check. You're paying their salaries, their buddies' salaries, their retirement, their buddies' retirement. That's really what you're funding.
To put it in perspective, so Monroe County,
aside from the $2 million
sign,
$2 million signs.
So Monroe County's assessed values increased by $1 billion than what they were the year before. And when the assessor found that number out, I mean, she was giddy. Like,
they probably had a party.
Oh, yeah.
They probably ordered a case of champagne.
Just giggling about it. Like, she was so ecstatic that it was our second $1 billion increase within the last few years. And I mean, she was quite happy.
And if you're a public servant, I think you should be sad about that.
Mm-hmm.
You're supposed to be working for the taxpayers. You're supposed to be working for the people that live in the county. Because they're paying your bill. You shouldn't be giddy about getting more money from them. You should be trying to figure out how to do more services for them for the money you have.
And when, like, those on Social Security would call in and say, we're going to have to sell our home. I've lived here my whole entire life. I'm going to have to move out of Monroe County. And when you hang up from that taxpayer and the assessor says, well, too bad you can't afford to live in Monroe County, sell your house and move then.
So for someone listening,
sickening.
What would they do if they believe their house was taxed unfairly, exorbitantly high, and it's not really what the market value is? What is their specific process for appealing that?
So for their county, they need to find out what their appeal season is, those deadlines.
What are they approximately in Monroe County?
So May 1st is when the new Form 11s go out and like the new property record cards drop on the GIS. So from May 1st until June 15th, during that 45 days.
So you only have 45 days to appeal?
Only 45 days. Unless it's like a correction or an error, then you could call in and ask for that correction to be made.
Wow.
So just during that 45 days, and you just want to try to get comps.
So if you're not paying attention to your mail, and a lot of people just blindly write a check.
That happens a lot.
And they don't pay attention to it. If it's an older person, they get in the habit of just paying something without looking at it, they could really get rooked on this.
Oh, yeah. It happens
and then they
all the
have
time.
no means to appeal if they miss that very narrow deadline.
Correct. Mm-hmm. And things to look for. So what changes your value on your property record card? Each dwelling has a grade. You have a construction year and effective year. Your effective year is like if you had a remodel. Say your house was constructed in 1980, but you had a big remodel. Well, they're going to put your effective year at like 2020, and that could raise your value. So they just need to look for any changes that they made to the characteristics of their home, and that is supposed to be notated on their property record card.
But in just that 45 days,
It's short,
that is terribly
and
unfair
that is
to
by
people.
design.
Because if you're a snowbird and you're out, down in Florida or on vacation, and you come back and you don't check your mail right away, and your tax bill went through the roof.
And property owners, something that they don't know about, if you just purchased the home, you want to look at your assessed value. You have the right, because we're a market value state. If you purchase your home for your sale price is lower than your assessed value, you have the right to call in to your county assessor and have them lower that to match it.
Well, and this is why I call these people thieves, folks, because there's a lot of older people that will just take it in and pay the higher tax and never question it because they don't want to cause waves. They don't want their neighbors saying, well, you're not paying your fair share, even though they are getting rooked unfairly.
Correct.
That's what bothers me on this, because I know a lot of older people that just would absolutely just, whatever the bill will be, they will pay it and move on. And then their family comes out later to find, where's all your money going? And it's to the property tax.
Most
when they
people
don't
do.
have money to pay for medicine,
Right.
or the health insurance premium, or to go to bingo night at the local KFC or whatever.
You're right. And most people, because they blindly trust their elected official. They're trusting their elected official in good faith.
And I have to admit, I did that too. Before I ran for political office, I had an innate trust in the state of Indiana Republican Party. Nothing has opened up my eyes further, folks. They couldn't be more wide open today than what crooks and thieves these people are. Crooks and thieves. Evil crooks and thieves. And I know those are harsh terms, but when you see people like this taking advantage of elderly people who are just wanting to stay in their home and live a life of retirement and go to church, and then they face all these taxes, and and I say this repeatedly, but it's crazy, and now they want to toll you. So if you have to get on the interstate to go to church, folks, you're going to have to pay a toll. If you want to go to your job, you're going to have to pay a toll. If you want to go up to Indy to go watch a Colts game, you're going to have to pay a toll. That's what all they look at is for money. And as I understand it, I-69 between Bloomington and Indianapolis already has the toll cameras in place. So folks,
crazy.
They are just gunning for your wallet. It is coming. I am trying to stop it with this program. I think I've got enough attention by raising a ruckus over this that they may be slowing down on it, right? What I notice right now is Governor Braun is only talking about tolling I-70 between Terre Haute and Muncie. But, folks, we shouldn't be tolling any of Indiana interstates. We already have the fourth highest gasoline tax in the country. Mike Braun is saying that, well, truckers don't stop in Indiana to buy fuel. Well, of course they don't. Look at what our fuel taxes are. If we actually lowered our fuel taxes, we would take more money in. Did you know that? That's what we found out with the tax cuts in the early 1980s. Government revenue actually increased when we lowered the tax rates. You remember that back in the Reagan era? And that has been totally forgotten about or just ignored by the Indiana GOP establishment and the Democratic establishment. They're both in cahoots on this, folks. The Democrats absolutely positively are not going to say, oh, property taxes are bad, let's not do them. No, they will be worse than the Republicans. At least the Republicans pretend to be conservative. The Democrats don't. And on tolls, what I don't like about the Indiana Democrat Party is they really have a war on cars. Do you see what's going on in Indianapolis where they're taking away lanes from cars and making everyone ride bicycles, and they're trying to force you on the bus?
Monroe County, too.
And I see what the rates are for supporting the bus service in downtown Indianapolis. It would be cheaper for people to take an Uber than what it is per ride that taxpayers have to pay for people to ride those buses. That is insanity. And I actually saw it. It would be cheaper for everyone who's actually riding a bus for the state of Indiana to buy them their own car, brand new car, than what it costs to take the bus. Government is not the answer. That's why I don't like the IEDC. I don't like government picking winners and losers. It is the job of us as Americans, as Hoosiers, to make our state better. Just like my family, we started out with just 1,000 chickens, and we grew a family business today that feeds over 20 million people every day.
Wow.
That's a Hoosier success story. That's what we need. We don't need Hoosier taxpayers having to subsidize large corporations like these data centers. And folks, we're going to get into that a little bit when we come back We're out of time. This is John Rust on Rust on the Radio. I'll be right back soon. Hang on. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on the Radio on Freedom 95, broadcasting at 950 AM and 95.9 FM on your radio dial, broadcasting all across the beautiful fruited plain of our beautiful state of Indiana. And gosh, it is so beautiful, especially in the fall. Love Indiana fall. And I love the drive from Seymour, where I live, to Bloomington in the fall over Lake Monroe. My gosh, what a beautiful drive. I'm here with JENEE Trimble, and we were talking about data centers and property taxes. But JENEE, before we talk about the data centers again, I want to get back into how assessed property values are actually being fraudulently assessed. Would you like to go into that more?
To increase the collected property tax amounts, my assessor, I've discovered 9 state code violations that I can prove, like with documentation.
So we have these assessors out there who really can just pick a number out of the sky and say that's what your property tax is. You have an extremely narrow appeal process. Walk us through that appeal process. So if you make it through the 45 days, what's your first step?
So once you get your new assessment, your first step, you can call into the assessor's office and try to see if they could lower that informally.
And what do you think the success rate is on that?
Very low, because we are trained to manipulate the taxpayer into just accepting.
You're kidding me. I'm saying that sarcastically,
yes,
folks.
accepting their assessments. So if they do not, the next step, you can file a Form 130, which is like your official appeal. Then you would go before the local PETA BOA board.
What's a PETA BOA board?
So it's just the appeal board for the county, and all
Okay.
that is, it's your assessor. And in Monroe County, at least 3 members have to be on there, and they're just members of the community.
Okay.
Just regular people like
And
you
who
and I.
appoints them?
I believe it's the commissioners that
Okay.
appoint them. Of course, the commissioners lean heavy on the assessor, their recommendation.
Well, I know how these boards operate, folks. I faced the Indiana Election Commission when I was running for the U.S. Senate, and they very quickly removed me from the ballot
How our board operates.
because they were under the thumb of
Yes.
the big powers behind the scene. You know, it was just a rubber stamp, and I presume that's what these boards
Yes, how our board operates, the assessor goes over the property record card with the board, tells them exactly what she wants. So then when the taxpayer goes in, the board already knows how they're going to vote.
are. Okay, so
So-
your chances are pretty dismal, really.
Small.
Very small.
So your next step, and most people don't even go that far because they're intimidated. But again,
Well,
these
yeah,
are just
that-
normal,
exactly.
local people like you and I, so it should not be no intimidation whatsoever. Their next step would be to file with the state, the Indiana Board of Tax Review. And again, do not be intimidated by that. They tend to be more taxpayer friendly,
Okay.
and then the burden's going to lie on the assessor to prove their numbers. But if you have comps, if you have an appraisal, as long as you have evidence to support your claim, you stand a good
You
chance
absolutely
there.
should do it then. But
Absolutely.
it won't be
You have
until
nothing
it
to
won't be
lose.
until the second level. And like you said, you have nothing to lose.
Nothing to
And the
lose.
more and more folks that challenge them, folks,
Then it shows.
then it will help keep them honest on other houses.
Yes.
That's a big deal. If we blindly trust government, they will rob us blind every time. So we always have to be challenging. You know, one concern on outside contractors that actually do the assessment, what's the name of that company that does that for Monroe County?
Nexus.
How much are they paid to actually do that for that county?
So Nexus and the owners of that company are also the co-creators of Indiana's assessment system and the creators in creating the state agency, the Department of Local Government Finance, and the Indiana Board of Tax Review that
Well, there's no
that
collusion
oversee
there.
them.
That's transparent
Yes. But in Monroe County's contract,
as mud. That's transparent as mud.
right, huge conflict of interest. Monroe County pays Nexus $400,000
$400,000
per year.
Wow. So, folks, for 92 counties, that would be $36.8 million being paid to this private company who voters can't vote on to assess what your property taxes are. Wow. Something is rotten in the state of Indiana. And of course, it's the money.
It's the money. And with the assessed values are fraudulent. So therefore, the assessed values are used to determine your tax rates.
Mm-hmm.
So if your assessed values are fraudulent, your tax rates are fraudulent, the tax levies are fraudulent, the collected property tax amounts are fraudulent.
But we still have to pay it.
Still have to pay it. And your budgets, your county budgets, are all being passed on fraudulent values.
And so we get these $2 million welcome signs and courthouse annexes for buildings we don't really need.
And homeowners.
Homeowners have to pay for it, and homeowners are losing their homes as a result.
That's what I was going to say. When they lose their homes in tax sales, they're losing their home based on a fraudulent assessed value, fraudulent property tax collections, and their late fees and their penalties are all fraudulent. So they're losing their homes illegally.
Wow. Folks, that is what we're facing, and that's why I so applaud folks like JENEE TRIMBLE here, who is fighting the system, who's standing up, for Hoosiers, for taxpayers. That's what we have to do. That's what we're called by God to do. We can't just sit by and let things happen and hope it doesn't happen to us, because it will always happen to you. And that's the big deal that I have with all of the Indiana Republican establishment passing all these taxes. After taxes, they're frauds, pure and simple, massive frauds. We should not have the high taxes we do. Why on earth does Indiana only trail California in retail tax, and we are only 0.25 cents lower than the state of California? And there is not a more lunatic left state in the country than California. And Indiana is a ruby red state. There isn't a more red state than Indiana, pure and simple. Look at what our margins were for President Trump. It is massively always supporting Republicans. We only have Republican statewide office holders. But what's happening, folks, with this property tax scandal that's going on all across our state, the Republican establishment GOP is opening themselves up to a crazy left-wing Democrat Party. That's why we have to have reform now. That's why we have to have meaningful property tax reform now. That's why I support Indiana doing exactly what Governor DeSantis is doing in Florida to eliminate property tax for homeowners. There is not a more conservative governor in the entire nation than Ron DeSantis, folks. He is working hard to eliminate property tax for homes in Florida. We should be doing the exact same thing here in Indiana, because it is just a massive fraud. And these people are screeching like, well, you're going to do away with the fire departments. You're going to do away with the police. No. Not at all. And time again, what they spend the money on, if you're spending $2 million for a Welcome to Bloomington sign or $1 million for a Welcome to Seymour sign, you have too much tax revenue, pure and simple.
I could vouch for that. When I was in the auditor's office, I handled all of the claims for the county. Mm-hmm. And a very minimal amount is spent on your sheriff department, your police department, your fire department. There is so much over expenditure, waste. People would be shocked. The training and the travel,
Well, I saw it happen firsthand in Jackson County with this massive new courthouse annex that you would think is a luxury hotel in Jackson County. I guess it matches the $1 million welcome sign.
Monroe County's wanting to build their new Justice Center, and I think it's $254 million.
$254 million for what?
The new Justice Center. New jail, and they want to move the courthouse, the legal
Folks,
buildings.
That's what's happening in the state of Indiana right now, because it's happened in Jackson County. It's happening in Monroe County. We are being faced with government building massive palaces while your own palace is being taken away from you through higher and higher property taxes. Folks, we're out of time. I want to thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much, JENEE, for coming in. I hope to have you again.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
Well, thank you for what you're doing, and keep up the good work. Keep shining the flashlight. Keep raising the curtain on what's going on in the state of Indiana. Folks, thank you so much for listening. I want to close with my father's favorite Bible verse, Psalm 118, verse 24. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. This is John Rust. I will see you all again next week on the radio.